And particularly, I remember reading the newspaper around January of 2011, so that was the 82nd legislature. And I read in the newspaper that we had this big deficit coming, and we're going to wisely not use the rainy day fund, and we're going to fire a bunch of teachers. You remember that?
Yes.
I'm a big fan of public education, and I have been for many years, for reasons we can talk about at length. But I saw that, and I saw two things. First of all, why are we just now having a deficit? I mean, the worst is over. I was in business at the time, and we had two strong boards behind us. What is it about Texas financial accounting that, you know, a half a year later, we're struggling with a deficit? That made no sense to me. And then why are we going to fire teachers instead of use the rainy day fund? I mean, what's the rainy day fund for if it isn't for that, when you think about it? So I smelled a rat, and what I thought at that time was, you know, the Republicans have been in charge statewide in the legislature for many years. And when that happens, and they aren't really effectively challenged, they start making bad decisions. You see that in the business world all the time, and I think that's really what's happening here. And this is a very bad decision. You fire these teachers, and it's not good for the kids, and you can't get those years back from those kids. So that's when I first took notice that we might have a problem. But I didn't act then. I wasn't retired yet. I was still working. It was 2 years later, at the start of the 83rd legislature. And of course, we didn't have those deficits, right? It was clear by the time we got to the next session that we did not have deficits. Those deficits that were expected to drive all these cuts. We actually had a surplus. We actually had a very large surplus. So that ought to make you really pretty unhappy. It was at the start of the 83rd legislature when the press were asking Perry, all right, Governor, we made those cuts and we didn't have to. Now what are we going to do about it? Are we going to restore it or not? Now, you remember what he said? And again, I'm reading the newspaper, I'm just reading this. He said, my track record in education is phenomenal. He said, student enrollment's only up 22%, but investment is up 70%. And boy, I smelled a rat, and I looked into that number, and that's a bad number. That's a bad number. That's a false assertion, purposely misleading, and that really made my blood boil. If you dial it all, put all the pieces together, investment in education under Rick Perry on a per-student basis, which is how you ought to look at it, has actually declined 10%. And yet he's running around telling Texans that his record is phenomenal, and then Texans go back to sleep. And we didn't really restore those funds. We cut 5.4, we restored 3.2, that's a partial restoration. We actually aren't spending that. So when I read that, I thought somebody really has got to find a way to get involved in government. Maybe somebody from the outside, maybe a Democrat. To shake things up, right?
That's right.
And of course, Bill White. Bill White was a mayor in Houston, and I was thinking to myself, now would be a good time for Bill White to go in there and throw some punches. Because that's a hard-working, honest businessman who also is a good Democrat. Where's Bill White when you need him for this job, right? I was in that frame of mind when I read that Susan Combs, the incumbent, was stepping down, reading the newspaper. And in the first half of that article, here's all the Republicans that are signing up to take her place. Right out of central casting. Professional politicians don't know anything about it. It's like, where's the Democrats? Where's the Democrats? Maybe this is the moment. At the very end of that article, there was a consultant, Jason Stanford is his name, and they asked him, Jason, you know all of the Democrats and what's happening inside the party. Who's going to run for comptroller on the Democratic side? And Jason said, I don't know if anyone will do it. He said that we didn't have a comptroller candidate in 2010. It's almost impossible to win this race. Somebody with a political career is not going to bet their political career on such a long shot. I don't think we'll have a Democrat. I called Jason that afternoon and I said, you have found your Democrat. And then I probably spent the next 3 months saying, what have I done? That's why it meant so much to me to run into you. I was in there, what am I doing here? That's why your inspiration has continued to inspire. So that's why I'm here. I've never done anything in politics, but I'm absolutely determined to win because somebody has got to do this. Now, when you think about, what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about sort of the 5 financial priorities of the state, see how that links back to education, transportation, water infrastructure. I'm going to share you my point of view as to those 5 priorities. And then we'll take questions if you have any, and then we'll talk about politics. And we'll leave, we'll talking about, you know, why we're going to win and how we're going to consider. So let's talk about the state financially. You can interrupt me at any point if you like. I've studied our state's finances for a year now, and I have formed this point of view. We must invest in public education. We must invest in transportation infrastructure. We must invest in water infrastructure. We must not become addicted to debt, and we must not raise taxes. That's what we have to try to accomplish. Now let me ask, does anybody in this room disagree with any of those five? Well, it sounds pretty reasonable, doesn't it? I carry that message to Democrats, Independents, Republicans alike, and I get the same reaction. Yep, I think I'm with you. Now we're going to talk a little bit about education in a minute, because that's not a place where Republicans and Democrats agree at all on education. We'll talk about that. But if you think about those five priorities, let's evaluate the performance of the Republicans along those five lines, shall we? Education we've already discussed. Our investment on a per student basis has declined 10%. We're now one of the worst states in the country in terms of investments per student, 47th out of 50 states. And it's not like it ought to cost us less in Texas. It actually ought to cost us a little more in Texas, because we have two very distinct disadvantages. We have a very high proportion of poor children, and that takes more money, not less. We have a very high proportion of children who don't speak English or aren't English proficient. So there's no cost advantage to Texas where we should be proud that we're at the very bottom of the league tables across the United States. What it means is we're just doing a lousy job with public education. So we need to spend money in public education. And the good news is, as I run around the state talking to people, with the exception of that hard right of the Republican Party, Texans agree with what I just said. Texans want a very high quality public school system. And I'm going to put emphasis on public school system. Here's why. Instead of charter schools and choice and vouchers and all this nonsense that you hear from the other side. Now, why do I say nonsense? We got 5 million kids coming at us. They're our kids, and we got to train them up. If we don't train them up, they won't be self-sufficient. If we don't train them up, we're not going to have the people, the skilled workers to our economy and so forth. And 97% of them are coming through the public school system. So you have these school choice programs out there, charter schools and other imaginary things, and I'm all for innovation. I'm all for thinking outside the box. Let's find new and ways to do things. But that's only handling about 3% of the 5 million kids that are coming at us. The 97% of those 5 million kids coming at us are going through the public schools. So we got to get public schools right. And as I travel the state and I talk to folks about, we really need to invest in public education. Here's what comes back. It's perfectly reasonable. See if you all agree. If we're going to put more state money into public schools, let's do two things. Let's make sure that it goes into the classroom, right? I think that's perfectly reasonable. By that I mean teacher compensation, class size, use of specialists, programs that touch the kids to prepare them for learning, like food. Point number one, make sure that it goes into the classroom. Point number two, make sure that we invest in career readiness. Not everybody goes to college. So the kids who aren't college bound, let's help them get into a skilled trade where they can make really good money. You talk to Texans and say, let's invest in public education on those two lines. They agree. They agree. Now there's this hard right that has this point of view. It's in their platform, by the way, the Republican Party platform. Reduce spending in public education at all levels. That's in their platform. That's what their candidates are campaigning on. That is not what Texans want. There might be this small group within the Republican Party that might, and they're calling the shots. That's not what Texans want. So that makes this choice pretty easy. Now let's move on to roads. Transportation infrastructure. We know in the oil fields the roads are torn up. They weren't designed for frac trucks. We need to re-engineer those roads. They don't need to be gravel. We need to re-engineer those roads. That's actually a small part of the transportation challenge. If you look at a metric that I key in on, lane miles per person in the state, that's an indication of our mobility around the state. At the start of the period terms, we were 19th out of 50 states in terms of lane miles per person. Since he's been governor, we've declined to 23rd out of 50 states in lane miles per person. We're growing very rapidly. We're not keeping up with our transportation infrastructure. The business community is very concerned about that. We should all be concerned about that. So I give them very low marks in terms of keeping up with transportation infrastructure. Water infrastructure. This drought, and we've had some rain, it's green wherever I go now. I know that means the plants are happy, but the humans still have a big problem on our hands. We might get an El Nino, it might start raining again, but and I hope that it does, but what this drought has showed us is that our water infrastructure is very fragile. And if it starts raining in the fall, fabulous. And we're gonna keep growing as a state, and the next drought we have, we're not gonna get through that one. We barely got through this one, just in terms of having more water. So if you look at our investment performance across those three things, the state isn't investing. I give the Republicans very low marks. And so that's one of the things that we're all working on. You listen to Wendy and Tisha and me, those are the things that we have on our minds. That's what Texans have in mind. We'll talk about debt. The last two are don't get addicted to debt, don't raise taxes. Let's talk about debt. There's this myth that we balance our books, right? There's a myth out there that we balance our books, so we have to balance our books. There's one part of the state's finances that we have to keep in balance. That's the general fund. But we are able to borrow, and we do borrow, in other areas of the state. And in fact, if you look at our bonded indebtedness at the state level, in 2002, it was $17 billion. This is highways, buildings, universities, and so on. It was $15 billion. $15 billion in 2002. It's now $42 billion. So the debt on our books has grown 9.5% per year on average. That's just the bond indebtedness. Our economy's only grown 6%, our population's only grown 2%. If you add to that our unfunded pension liability, that's debt. That's debt. That's enough. That was $2 million in 2002, plus 15 that I mentioned earlier, 17 billion now. It's over 35 billion now. Add that to the 42 billion that I mentioned earlier, bonded, 77 billion. The total indebtedness in the state has gone from 17 billion to $77 billion. That's a 14.5% per year annual growth rate. Our economy's only grown 5 or 6%. Now, I don't want to alarm anybody. Debt is useful when you're growing, but you got to be smart with it. And we're showing signs of not being smart with debt. Now, I want you to think about one other thing. We also have a lot of cash on the books. That's good. It offsets that debt. We've got about $30 billion in cash on the books. That's good. But what are you hearing from the Republicans? Now, listen very carefully to this. What you're hearing from the Republicans is we have all these surpluses and we have all this cash. So let's give it back. Let's give it back in the form of tax relief. You've heard that, right? They're out there sprinkling their catnip. We're the ones you can trust. We're going to give you that money back. We're going to give you that money back. Well, first of all, who's going to get that money? Who gets it back? Right? That money came from us.
Probably the rich.
Came from us as consumers. Are we going to get it back?
No.
Do you trust them to get that right? If you leave them entirely to their own devices, do you trust them to get that right? I don't. I've studied finances. I've looked at what they do with taxes. Do not trust them to take care of us. But even if they could give it back in a way that's fair, how is that fair to our children and our grandchildren? The proposition is that you would take that mountain of debt and give it to our kids and take that mountain of cash and line our pockets with it. So even if you could give it back to us in a way that's fair, it's not fair to our children and grandchildren. So as comptroller, now this is going to lead to how does a controller fit into all this? First of all, comptroller doesn't have a voice. I can't vote on anything in the legislature. Sorry. Comptroller doesn't have a vote. I can't vote on anything in the legislature, but I've got a voice. And I can analyze these numbers, and I can have this conversation and inform Texas of what's really happening in our finance. And then you can call your senator, you can call your representative. Let's go back. I'm going to really drive this point home. Let's talk about education funding. Remember, we started this conversation by saying we've got a controller said there's a deficit coming. Legislature went out and fired teachers. That's the way it works. The controller sets the parameters. The controller says, here's how much money we've got to spend. And the legislature has to stay within that. If the comptroller says, well, we only have $72.2 billion, that was her number. The legislature says, well, that's not enough. We've got to do cuts. That was a good number. 72.2 was what she said we would have. What do you think we ultimately had that year that we made those cuts? She said it was 72.2 billion. It was 90.2 billion. You see the point? So if the controller charges in there and says, well, we don't have enough money, then the senators and representatives go home to their district and say, well, we know we want good schools, but we just don't have enough money. That's the way the game is played, and that's what's got to stop. That is the number one thing that this comptroller's got to do, is let's take politics out and put competence in and let Texans know what are the real numbers. Because guess what? Lo and behold, we do, in fact, have enough money to invest in schools and roads and water infrastructure, and we do not have to get addicted to debt, and we do not have to raise taxes. We have enough money. Money is pouring into the Treasury. What we need is an honest comptroller to hold the legislature accountable. Okay? That's a big part of it. Now, before we get into politics, we'll open it up to questions. I want to say one thing. That's about tax collection. You know, the comptroller's job is to collect the taxes. So if the Constitution says we have a property tax, and that all properties have to be market value, and the tax on that basis, the comptroller's job is to make sure that happens. And if you have a comptroller that's looking the other way, doesn't care, more concerned about business than about you, you end up in the situation we are right now, where the owners of large commercial industrial properties are valued at 65% plus or minus. Your home, closer to 100%. Large commercial industrial properties, 65%. The large appraisal districts way back in 2006 said that that's $4 billion missing per year from our treasury. And what that means is that lands on our backs. You asked the question like I asked the question, why are my property taxes going up and schools and roads going down? That's a big part of the problem. So we're going after that. Now I know what you're thinking. Mike, you look like a businessman. You come from a business. All right, help me understand this. Now let me explain myself. First of all, I'm pro-business, and I've said that from the outset. I am pro-business. Without business, you don't have jobs. You don't have growth. When I'm pro-business, I think we need to invest in education. Business community is there. We need to invest in roads. We need to invest in our water infrastructure. That's the pro-business side of me. When it comes to taxes, I know how that game is played, and I'm going after the bad guys. Okay? That's my world. I know where all the bodies are buried, and I'm going after them. And I'll tell you why I'm not afraid either. These corporations, if they're not paying their taxes, you got good guys and you got bad guys. I don't want to, paint everybody with this brush. You do have good corporate citizens out there, good guys that pay their taxes. But you also have bad guys. The good guys hate the bad guys as much as they hate paying taxes, because it means they have to pay more. So we're going after the bad guys. And guess what? These corporations don't vote. Their employees vote. And their employees are homeowners. They want to see us get to the right place too. That's a big part of the comptroller's job. And we're missing at least $4 billion from the treasury a year, because we haven't had a comptroller who's going after the bad guys. So I'm going after the bad guys. You roll all that together, more precision around revenues, go after the bad guys. Money's pouring into the transom. We can do those things. We can invest in schools, invest in roads, invest in water. We do not have to get addicted to debt. We do not have to raise taxes. But you're going to have to hire Democrats to do that. Okay? So that's our state finances at a very high level. Let me stop there before we get into politics and ask. Yes, sir.
You talked about the policy issues, and that's great, and I appreciate the overview. The question I have is, what's your sense of the state of the Comptroller's office right now as far as getting things done? I mean, the policies are there, and you have to provide guidelines. What's your sense of how much work would be there to do in the Comptroller's office itself to kind of get them in shape?
Well, first of all, I have not spoken to anybody in the Comptroller's office presently, because I don't want to get anybody in trouble. I'm not sure that they even appreciate that I called, because, it's pretty dirty business, they say. But I've cultivated a relationship with a lot of the old Bob Bullock people. So there's a big group of the old Bob Bullock retirees that are very passionate about the Comptroller's office, keep up with it. They have friends that are still involved. And the sense that I get is that we have a lot of work to do to reform the Comptroller agency. There's a lot of dissatisfaction in the ranks. We haven't had a strong, effective, fair, dynamic leadership in that job. And so I think there's an awful lot of work to do. And I think the way that's going to affect us as homeowners and consumers is that if you're not running a tight ship in that comptroller's office, then this boat's going to leak. It's going to leak revenues. Very similar to in my commercial world, where you talk about value leakage. We have laws on the books where taxes need to be collected, and they aren't being collected. My view of it is that the legislature decides what the taxes are. The comptroller doesn't get to decide which ones to chase and which ones not, particularly when there's campaign contributions involved. So to answer your question, I think there's quite a lot of work. The other thing I want to mention too is if the citizens of the state of Texas look to the Comptroller first for knowledge about what's happening around them, I give Susan Combs an F. Enough said, huh?
I still have stuff on the Comptroller. It seems like to me a $20 billion error. How does that get overlooked? Do you think she's incompetent, or is that intentional? Is that Republican, I don't know, tactics? Is there anybody above the Comptroller that said, hey, you missed this by $20 billion? $20 billion.
Well, let me sort of walk with you through for you sort of the development of those numbers, just very simply. At the start of the 82nd legislature, she said that the biennium that we're in, there's going to be a deficit of $4 billion. So we're going to have to take $4 billion out of the next biennium and put it into this one to balance this general budget. Then the legislature came in and did their work, and after they met and everything was signed, sealed, and delivered, including the teachers' cuts, then and only then did she inform us. Oops. It's not a $4 billion deficit, it's a $1 billion surplus. That's a $5 billion surplus. I'll let you be the judge as to whether or not that's possible. Just 1 second. And then $5 billion difference. But then as the year went on, and you had the benefit of hindsight, it wasn't a $5 billion difference. It was a $18 billion difference. I'm often asked that question. Is this politics or is it incompetence? And my answer is it doesn't matter. Whether it's politics or incompetence or some combination of the two. Let's take politics out and put competence in. It's going to change everything.
How does the press not pick up on this?
Well, I think sometimes they do and sometimes they don't. You know, we live in such a great state. The weather's always so nice, and the economy's good. And sometimes it's hard to. But then every once in a while you come along and fire 11,500 teachers. And that's when the bell rings. Whoa, whoa, whoa! Wait a minute! And you watch the Republicans that are coming down the pike that want to sit in those statewide offices, cut education across all levels. If we don't elect Democrats, what happens for them will make what we've been through look like small stuff. I think it could be awful. Yes, ma'am, you had a question?
Real quick.
Yeah.
In keeping with the conversation about the competence of our past controllers, there was one controller that was in there only 1 year, is that correct? Or a very short amount of time?
No, not that I'm aware of.
Okay.
There was a treasurer. Oh,
Okay.
I know what you're
Okay.
thinking. You're thinking the treasurer. There was a woman who ran for the treasurer, and I think she might have been from this part of the state. And her campaign platform is to get rid of the treasury.
Okay.
So she got elected, she got rid of the treasury, she went back to the farm.
State of Texas, right?
State of Texas,
Now,
so you're
what's
right.
the difference between the treasury and the controller?
The treasury now is part of the larger controller group, and the controller group handles accounting and tax collection and budgeting and forecasting. And the treasury is a piece of that just is the cash that we have on hand. What banks do we put it in? How do we make sure that it's safeguarded and that when checks get written, they don't bounce and so forth. So,
Now, having a Democrat running for the controller makes me feel really, really happy because I've been doing a lot of research into property taxes because they don't seem to have been adjudicated fairly or meted out fairly the way they determine property values and things of that nature. And I know there are at least 3 Republicans who are running on the platform of cutting out property taxes. What would they substitute that with? What is their premise for that?
well, we'll jump ahead to the politics side of it. And answer your question very directly. And then I'm going to come back and answer the first question very directly too. My opponent is campaigning on cutting the property taxes completely and replacing it with the sales tax, which would mean your sales tax are going to triple.
Yeah, it's already at 8.some%, right?
Yeah, at the state level 6.25, and then you add the local to it, it gets you up to 8.25. The Republican Party platform says get rid of the property tax and replace it with a sales tax. That would drive our sales tax up 3 times. You'd be paying 20% sales tax, right? Which is absurd, and that's a terrible answer. It is so unfair. It's shockingly unfair. Some economists say it would actually be higher than that. It would actually be 25%. because it'll affect voter behavior. And so we'll have to, and I think it'll even worse than that. I think merchants in the state will head for the borders
Sure.
and sell through the internet, and people, and I think it'll ruin us. I think it'll absolutely ruin us.
Yeah.
And it's a plank in the Republican Party platform, and it's so unfair. It's the most regressive tax we have. It's not a Texas value. Texans aren't going to tolerate this. But it is a plank in the Republican Party platform. My opponent is campaigning on it. I'm running around the state making sure you understand, you know, if you wonder whether this matters to you, how would you like to have a 20% sales tax?
Thank you for helping me
Sure.
understand that, because every time I wrote a resolution in the Democratic, for the Democratic convention, it said, okay, well, let's do that too. That way we'll win, because Republicans are gonna win on that. Folks don't wanna
Right.
pay property tax, but what is the alternative?
What they're gonna hear from me, is if you cut property taxes, then how are you gonna replace it? Your choice is to raise sales tax or fire teachers. All right, Dan Patrick. Come on, buddy. Talk to me. I don't say Clint Hager's, you know, I'm not running against Dan Patrick, I'm running against Clint Hager, but he doesn't grasp any of these concepts. He hadn't said a word. He's been campaigning for a year and he hadn't said a word about it. The only thing he said is cut property tax, replace it with sales tax. But otherwise, he doesn't. Here's my point of view on sales tax. Don't replace don't replace property tax. Fix property tax. You know, any tax system is complicated and it has to be attended to. It's like a garden. You got to tend to it. Things change and people change and you got to tend to it. It has not been tended to. The Republicans are utterly indifferent to how we feel about property tax. They've allowed the large commercial industrial properties to be down at 60%. We as homeowners get no relief. Homeowners are very anxious about property taxes because values are going up.
Yes.
So your taxes are going up. And you find yourself, Texans, our neighbors, in houses where they've been for 20 years, suddenly they can't afford to live in that house. They haven't done anything
That's
wrong.
right, that's right.
And it's not like because all of a sudden the roads are better and their schools are better, it's going to cost you. It's just the opposite. Taxes are going up, roads, schools and roads are going down. So what we need to do is fix it. We need to tend to it. And the Republicans just, for some reason, they just refuse to tend to it. And they make promises that they're not going to keep.
How would you fix it?
How would you fix it?
Yeah.
Well, the first order of business is Comptroller. My very first order of business is to go after the commercial industrial properties and make sure that they pay the taxes that they're supposed to under the law. That's a $4 billion. That's going to give the rest of us some relief because more money is going to be flowing in. Then we need to when it comes to homeowners and the anxieties that they feel. The state's very big, and there's places where it's a problem, places where it isn't a problem. Where you do have a problem, it's very unique locally. It takes forms locally. So what we should do is decide where are the problem areas and what's a solution for that problem, and then get the school board involved and get the district, the county involved, and get the municipality involved, and get people involved, and that's how you solve that problem. And it has to be done locally. It has to be done on a case-by-case basis. But what you need as the comptroller is somebody who's constantly pounding the drum, saying, this is what Texans want. And I hope they invite me to each and every one of those parties. Because I'm telling you, I'm not convinced that when they go fix something, they're not rigging something. I don't want them to rig it, I want them to fix it. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does, because here, I was working on citizens, like senior citizens, paying a large amount of money, let's say, to CTC in the public schools, and they may not have
Right.
children, or they're on fixed incomes, and they're
That's
not
right.
getting younger, and they're not getting more employable,
That's right.
but their incomes
That's
are
right. In
incrementally going down.
That's right. In some places the solution is just increasing the homestead exemption. In some places it might be a senior citizens exemption. That might be a possibility. In other places where it's really a supercharged problem, you might be able to defer the taxes. You know, the value of your house is growing, but that's not a monetary value. Good that the value is, if your house is growing, you're becoming house wealthy but cash poor. So how do you just sort of solve that? So perhaps, and what I don't want to do is get too deeply into all the possibilities, because at the end of the day, it won't be my decision, it'll be those local leaders' decision. And it has to be done so that it's relevant to the local community. So as controller, I can work real hard on the commercial and industrial side of things. And then I can provide leadership to make sure that folks are really doing things right by homeowners and local solutions.
I have a quick question on the
Yeah.
commercial property tax. You know, Republicans are going to say they're given those incentives to draw businesses into communities, whatever, create jobs.
Right.
What is your answer to that?
Well, that's another real sore point, and it drives me absolutely crazy. And I don't want to pick on any one deal and example, but I've seen plenty of them, so have you, where you have the suspicion that companies have chosen to move to Texas because we got great people and it's sunny and it's warm, et cetera, et cetera. But some politician runs ahead and said, "Better let me give you $5 million to do this, otherwise I don't get credit."
Right.
Right? So the second half of the question is this, Louis. I personally think economic incentives to move jobs in Texas make sense if it's done properly, if we make sure that we get a return on investment and the people in the community, their interests are protected. So I don't want to say, let's just don't ever do it. I actually think it can be quite useful, but you've got to approach it the way a chief financial officer of a company approaches spending money. What's going to be the impact? What's my return on investment? Then you got to drive a really hard bargain, and then you got to hold that company's feet to the fire. They got to do their part of the bargain. What I don't see in our incentives and abatements is any of that financial discipline. And so citizens are losing confidence in local leaders and state leaders and abatements and so on and so forth because they don't see that rigor, they don't see that transparency. So my objective is to try to bring that rigor and that transparency into it. I say try because the comptroller weighs in if it affects a school district, but doesn't really have any technical authority if it doesn't affect a school district. So if it affects a school district, then I can be involved, really involved, hands-on involved. If it doesn't affect a school district, then it's the leadership that I can provide, keeping Texans informed.
Oh, I just have a small question.
Yeah.
I am a military widow, and on the military side of the house versus the civilian side of the house, right now I am tax-free on my home, and there are some civilians that that are widows and having to pay taxes. So I'm just worried about the comptrollers coming in changing all that. Will there be any problem in the future on
Well, if
that?
there's a problem, you call me. This is
Okay.
this is a great
All right.
example of the local. You might find that in other parts of the state, but you're certainly going to find it here in Killeen. And so we need a uniquely tailored solution for Killeen and for your situation. So if we try to do it one size fits all across the state, then it would probably create all sorts of problems for us. But we need a localized problem. Now, as comptroller, you can call me. You call me.
I will.
You will too,
And I'm going to call Louis. And then Louis and I are going to call the county. And that's the way that problem should be dealt with. I guess we're running out of time.
You have time for one or two more.
Okay, one more. I want to get into the politics real quick, so.
When Strayhorn was our comptroller, she graded the school districts across the state as being from top heavy. Letting them know you had too many principals, too many admin, which cut the funding because schools realized they didn't do that.
Right,
And we received a report from her, a big huge book that I used to read.
right.
When she left, the book left. So.
I'm sorry, she went.
Huh?
Say that again.
When she left, so that the
So the
comptroller's
book.
report left. The book left.
Well, you know what
But I
happened?
mean, we didn't get any more reports.
Yeah, you know what happened? She stirred up